Hey, so it's me and Joe, and we're going to be talking a bit more personally in this pod. Yeah, we're going to be talking a bit more about practice of writing and what we do ourselves, just to kind of give you an insight and a sense of what we do as practitioners. One of the things that I'll mention is that at the moment I'm currently studying for an MA degree in art practice, and so that's been really interesting in feeding back into my my writing practices and teaching practices on the literature side of things. And so for things like the 101 project or the literature and film kind of creative project in the summer, what I've been doing, kind of my own kind of research and art practice and writing has interesting dialogues with what we're doing here.
Great. So I'm going to ask we've got a series of questions that we're going to ask, and both of us will answer them. So the first one is, what are you writing and what's your normal practice for writing?
Yeah, so I'm not writing anything kind of major at the moment. I've been concentrating on articles and book chapters for the last couple of years since my last book. Although generating quite a lot of material, and it's interesting to sometimes go to your files and realise quite how much you've drafted, and you kind of think, is this the beginnings of a book, or what is this? But at the moment, kind of one of the things is there's been a series of light bulb.
Hello.
Hello.
We're recording this too. Yeah. You've got to be okay. I'm gonna say bye-bye. Sorry.
But for me, there's been a series of kind of like light bulb moments where a lot of the things that I've been thinking about over the last 10 years or so, and there've been conference papers or articles or whatever it might be, they're kind of linked together in a way that I hadn't really quite understood. And I find that worked quite a lot for me, is that even though I might have ideas or not plans exactly, but ideas with regard to research and writing, often the connections between them make more sense in retrospect. And then I understand that I've really been pursuing the same thing, through different means over a longer period of time. Does it work like that for you, Jo?
Yes, it does. And I think for a long time, I felt like I've been working on a set of projects that from the outside just looked like a kind of random mixture of ideas that I kind of felt had the same kind of thinking behind them all. But for a similar way, for a while, I couldn't quite articulate what that was. And in the end, I have really been working on the relationship between aesthetics and beliefs in various different ways. So aesthetics in terms of how things look, but also how we sense the world. So and then beliefs in terms of prejudices and beliefs. So kind of what we believe about the world, not necessarily what we think or what makes sense, but the kind of maybe sometimes the non-reasonable or the non-rational beliefs that we have. So I've just finished a book on a Jewish festival, and I'm really interested in how the festival practices engage with what people believe about nationhood, about themselves, about identity. So there's kind of residual ideas about what that means about themselves by engaging in these ritual activities. I've also done a book recently on, I'm thinking a lot about roughness. So in the Lancaster Words little booklet, I wrote a little short thing on the word rough, and how the aesthetic of roughness and coarseness is a kind of class-based aesthetic in a lot of writing. So the roughs was a term used in the Victorian period. So those aesthetics and how we can kind of, our prejudices, so how something looks, whether it's smooth or it's rough, can produce this sense that it's either good or bad, when clearly cognitively when we think about it, you wouldn't say something is bad because it's rough, but we do think things are bad because they're rough. So I'm really interested in those kind of irrational beliefs and how they're related to the visual, but also the sensed world, so sounds, sights, feelings, all those kind of things. It's a thread through all my work, and I kind of only realised it recently.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Yeah. It's funny how roughness is kind of it can be a kind of an aesthetic positive, can't it? You can think about, kind of punk or DIY or zines or other forms of non-professional production, which are deliberately non-professional, and not meant to look non-professional as well, because they're then artisanal and outside of those modes of production. Is that kind of thing you're thinking about as well?
Yes, it is, and just how it depends on what kind of roughness it is, I think, but also it can be put to use in different kinds of ways. So obviously, if you're being countercultural, often you're deliberately trying to mark yourself as either to the kind of polished elite, or the kind of gentlemanly, or the kind of staid, proper way of doing things. So there's all sorts of ways it can be inflected that are positive as well as negative. I think I'm drawn towards kind of why it's negative, but yeah, the positive is equally as, it makes more sense in a way, because you're taking something that's established and you're doing something different with it. You're deliberately saying, this is an established set of values, that we see the smooth as good and the rough as bad, but I'm going to say the rough is good because I'm going to be different, so there's a kind of positive force to it. Makes more sense. But yeah.
And there's a materiality about the rough as well, isn't there? I mean, when I'm doing artwork and making collages and stuff, I much prefer doing material collages with paper and other materials rather than doing on Photoshop, because there's a kind of there's a tactility about it. There's a materiality about that thing which is different than the smoothness you get with cutting edges in Photoshop. I like to see where the edges are.
And I think, I'm really interested in the Victorian novel. So in David Copperfield, which many of you may have seen at the cinema, as well as perhaps having read, Dickens uses the term rough a lot in relation to Mr. Peggotty, who lives in the boat on the sands, and he says he's rough as a porcupine, and he calls himself rough all the time. And there's this kind of distinction between the smooth, slightly deceptive Steerforth and the family, the London families who are kind of very posh but alienating and cold and mean, and then this lovely warm family who are rough, but that roughness is a kind of tactility and a warmth and something you can touch and feel, and has much more positive connotations for Dickens. And I think he's drawing on all of that. And lots of other novelists are in the period, I think, as well.
Really interesting.